our Yes Network studios for the Brooklyn Nets postgame show, and I think Ryan pretty much summed it up well there at the end of the game, Frank. It was a lot of trying to dig out of holes for this Nets team the entire game. They got into it with that 38-point first quarter that they allowed the Pistons to have. They were never able to get back in it.
They trailed the final 47 minutes of this game. To me, this is very discouraging. It's a demoralizing loss. If you go back to a week ago, they beat the Clippers, a terrific team. All three of the big stars were playing. The Nets played well. Think about what's happened to this team since then, especially the situation with Kevin Durant is clearly throwing everything, in flux. But this was not a good performance. Detroit just had more energy, more bounce to their step. And how about the play of Jerami Grant? We talked about it in the pregame. This is a guy that you're talking about most improved in the league. He has really come out of it in this season.
We saw flashes from Kyrie Irving in that third quarter where he scored 12 points to help bring the Nets close. But it was the fourth quarter where they did come a little bit closer as well. Here's the third quarter. And we see that Kyrie layup after the four missed layups here, Frank, by Bruce Brown. Kyrie comes flying in and gets it to go.
Yeah, Kyrie had a three-pointer that cut the Detroit lead to 79-77. Detroit finishes off the quarter with a 15-9 run. That was the one where Jerami Grant banked in a shot, and then Mason Plumlee had a dunk. So when the Nets finally got close, they just could not get stopped. You kept waiting for it. Sarah and Ryan were talking about it during the telecast. Need a stop. They never could get one.
Sadiq Bey here.
Look at the Kyrie Irving
without the ball.
Kyrie Irving has his back turned. Your man is going baseline for a dunk.
And if loving the Lord is wrong, I don't want to be right. DeLon Wright with the spin move in the paint. And he puts them up 112-99 there. Now, we looked at this in the pregame show. In wins and in losses, points in the paint, fast break, and opponent points off turnovers. This is updated after tonight's loss. 58 points in the paint allowed tonight to the Pistons. And you could see the dichotomy here, Frank, between wins and losses.
Yeah, and also, you're talking about points in the paint. They had 40 in the first half alone. That's when the tone was set in this game. The Nets scored the first basket of the game. That was on a Joe Harris three. Detroit then rattled off 13 straight points, and for the rest of the night, the Nets were chasing the game. They never just seemed to be into it. There were a couple of things that you could tell happened. Steve Nash talking to DeAndre Jordan on the bench about defensive assignments. I thought a key move that Steve Nash had made at the start of the third quarter was inserting Bruce Brown into the lineup to begin the third quarter. He gave them a little bit more of a defensive presence. The Nets actually outscored Detroit in that quarter, but they just can never get close enough. Then at the start of the fourth, they let go of the rope again.
A little extra juice for Bruce Brown playing against his former team, but he's brought everything, especially on the defensive side of the ball for the Nets this entire season since he's been in the lineup. Kyrie Irving and James Harden, they had solid games, Frank, but it just wasn't enough to get the Nets over the top tonight.
Yeah, and really neither of them in the fourth quarter when the Nets needed someone to kind of break out. Remember, Kyrie had 25. After three quarters, James Harden had 19. So at the fourth quarter, that's when they needed someone, one of those two guys, to go on a run to get them into it. By far, the best player on the court tonight was Jerami Grant. It wasn't even close. What he was doing on both ends of the court, a long, lean, athletic player who was knocking down shots, getting to the basket. Like I said, very discouraging loss for the Nets. And something else to keep track of now. Kyrie Irving and the Nets play tomorrow night at home against Indiana. Kyrie late in the game was kind of flexing his hand.
Right.
He has the issue with his finger. Who knows how that could impact his status for tomorrow night.
We all know how good the Nets have been against teams 500 or above. They were 7-3 after their loss to Philadelphia. Well, here they are against teams that are 500 or worse. Frank, 7-11 teams under 500. Record versus teams 500 or better, 7-1. So, you got to look at this and say, this is a tale of two Nets teams.
Yeah.
I mean, which Net team is going to show up on any given night here?
Yeah, and a big part of this, too, obviously, is the situation with Kevin Durant. But as they like to say, it is what it is. Kevin Durant is not available. They need other guys to perform at a higher level. And you had a situation tonight. You were rested, as was Detroit, but you're rested. I understand the game's on the road, but this is a team with the worst record in the league. Detroit came out and gave you their best shot, and look what the result was. Do you really feel like the Nets gave it their best shot tonight? I don't feel that way at all. To me, they were a step slow. They weren't physical. There was no bounce to their step. That was all Detroit.
I don't want to keep harping on this because we've been talking about it all season long when we're here, Frank, and that is that bullseye on the Nets' back. Yeah. And you see that. Brown, Frank, in our pregame show and in our last segment, he was a second-round pick by the Pistons. Pistons in the 2018 draft, and he showed out a little bit against his former team tonight in Detroit.
Yeah, I really thought that was a nice move that Steve Nash had made at the start of the third quarter to get him in there to give you a little bit more of a defensive presence and a guy that's going to give you a lot of energy. Look at him here, going after a steal, getting on the floor. That's what you want to see your players do. And then here, Blake Griffin's trying to post up against you. Remember in the first half, Blake Griffin had posted up against James Harden, really had his way. Bruce Brown doing a much better job of fighting. Just he's a very active player. And on a night where your team doesn't seem to have that extra push, he was the guy right here, a little ahead of a pack, and gets a dunk.
And Brown, as we mentioned, Frank, it's the defensive side of the ball too. But this right here, where he misses the layups, he still has the wherewithal to grab the ball and reset. And Kyrie gets that layup there to draw the Nets within 4. But they lose tonight by 11, 122-111 to the Pistons. It's the 7th straight game the Nets have allowed 120 or more points. That is a franchise record. Kyrie Irving had 27 points, 12 of 28. Go ahead, Frank.
And to your point, that highlight that you showed, Bruce Brown fighting for the rebounds, that was the moment of the night for the Brooklyn Nets, because it was
absolutely.
He and TLC are under the basket fighting, trying to get a loose ball. It eventually ends up in Kyrie's hands. And like you said, Kyrie does a great job getting to the basket scoring. Now they're down 4. It's late in the third quarter. You're thinking maybe now things are starting to change, but they just could not get stops.
That's the effort they need for 48 minutes, what Bruce Brown gave them in TLC and that little piece that Frank just talked about. Let's hear from the head coach now, Steve Nash, with his thoughts on this loss.
Coach, first, your message to the team after the game and your assessment of what you saw out there.
Well, my message was personal pride, connectivity, and coming together. Just resistance. Like, we can't start the game down 10, be down 20 in the second half, expecting it to come easy. You know, this is professional sports. The other team is talented and capable, and we're shorthanded, we're small. We got to come out extremely sharp, extremely competitive, and we're the real fire. And it takes us getting down 20 to find that fire.
Is it any more disappointing or troubling when you had a rare couple of days off, you know, and to be locked in for this front end of a back-to-back and have this type of a performance?
You know, no matter what, it's frustrating. You know, no matter, you know, if it's a back-to-back, if it's a week off, you know, you come to the gym, you know, you got to want to fight with your teammates and make it extremely hard on the other team, make them miserable. And, you know, we didn't do that. We did it in stretches, proved that we can do it, but we got a lot to clean up. And the number one thing is just, you know, that attitude and that competition level and that connectivity. You know, those are things that you can't draw up. Those are things you can't practice. You just have to bring it. And I didn't feel that for 48 minutes.
Brian Lewis with the New York Post.
Hey, Steve. Obviously, there were a lot of issues to go around when you're discussing that kind of effort level and intensity. But I'm curious. I mean, there were a couple occasions where James took DJ aside. There were other occasions where it looked like you were having long talks with him. Were there things that they were doing that were kind of picking on DJ and taking advantage, or was it just making sure he was clear on what he should be doing and what the assignments were?
Yeah, I don't think they were necessarily picking on him. You know, it's an emotional sport. You know, we find ourselves in a hole and then get a little emotional, and it happens. But, you know, I don't think we get there if we come out with the, you know, correct intensity to start the game.
Malika Andrews with ESPN.
Steve, we've heard you've given that message to the group a couple of times now. It's the same issues that kind of continue to rear their ugly heads. Is now the time? Is it a matter of listening? Is it a matter of letting your message sink in? Is it a matter of you just need more time? Is this the time that's going to work, or what needs to happen now? Because effort and intensity, you've preached that before.
Yeah, I mean, it's up to the team to decide what type of team they want to be, you know, what they want to get out of this experience. I'm sure every team is going through this to some extent with the heavy schedule, you know, missing bodies, all sorts of stuff thrown at us. So I don't think we're in isolation here. I think there's a lot of teams that struggle with this from it's different nights. But I think our team needs to challenge themselves and figure out who they want to be and what they want to represent together. So, it's having played the game, a certain amount of that comes down to team building within that locker room and deciding, if they want to come together and be a force or if that's not as important. And I think right now,